Welcome friends to a farmyard in Dorset. We've discovered something absolutely remarkable. In fact, I'm supposed to say welcome and happy new year and thank you so much for joining us, but I'm too excited. We've just discovered this incredible church here in Winterbourne, Thompson. The church was actually visited by the current king, who said it was worth driving hours to get here. And I think he was right. It's what we would call a hidden gem. It's a church which has not been, I was going to say wrecked by the Victorians, and I think that's an appropriate term, because I'm sure they would have straightened everything out and put some lovely polished pews in there, which would have completely ruined the charm that this building has. But it's the organ that fascinates me. Give me a moment to consult my organ handbook. Our first church of the day takes us back centuries, a building of perfectly preserved beauty in the heart of Dorset. It's hard to believe that less than 100 years ago, St Andrew's in Winterbourne, Thompson was a near ruin, used as a shelter for donkeys, pigs and chickens from the farm next door. It's been under the care of the church's Conservation Trust for about 50 years, but only 2 services are held here each year. The church's survival is largely due to the foresight of an architect named Albert Powys, who saved this building in the 1930s, preserving it for us to enjoy. This is a team effort, friends. Welcome to St Andrew's Church in Winterbourne, Thompson. While Sophia's outside doing all the footage for me, which is super helpful, I'm taking a look inside this fantastic ancient building. And you really can call this one ancient. Even more than that, you could call it original, almost. The Victorians passed this church by. This is a Norman building, and it's one of only 4 churches in England to be a single cell design with a complete apse above the chancel. In other words, this church isn't built in a cross shape. It's very unique, and lots of people come to visit it if they can find it. But we haven't seen anybody today. Such a remarkable building. The furnishings in here are early 18th century, so almost exactly 300 years old. And they were brought here by William Wake, a early Archbishop of Canterbury, who was born nearby in Shapwick, and he really liked worshipping here. The light on a day like today is just fantastic. You'll notice that only the south side of the church has windows, and it's amazing to see the way the walls are pushing outwards as they get higher and higher. Nothing has been straightened out here. It's probably one of the most characterful churches I've ever visited on this channel. And you just heard the birds interrupting my speaking, but we also have a farmyard right next to the church, and some farmyard smells are emanating. It's the history of this building which is just so fantastic to learn about. Because, and it's very difficult to get a good light in here just because of the sunshine pouring in, but it gives it a very positive atmosphere. The last service officially was held in 1896 here, after which it wasn't used for worship. In fact, it was used as an animal pen, unbelievably. And an architect who is remembered on the wall here, Albert Reginald Powys, discovered this church, realised it was a hidden gem, and it was him who set about restoring it. And to restore it, they sold some manuscripts of a lover of all Dorset churches, Thomas Hardy, which raised £1,000. And at least half of that was used to restore this church. And it actually says on the wall, in memory of Albert Reginald Powys, architect and writer, the devoted servant for over 25 years of the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings, who is buried in this churchyard as he desired. This church, greatly loved by Thomas Hardy, was saved from ruin by the sale of certain of his manuscripts, which paid for work done here in 1929 to 1931. The pews increase in size as you move forwards, which reflects social rank. There's also the remains of a rood screen. Some parts of it were recycled to make a west gallery after the Reformation. And it's up in this west gallery where musicians would have performed. But what's most fascinating to me today is the organ, or should I say harmonium. Those musicians up in the gallery would have been made redundant by this imposter here, this harmonium. I don't mean to sound rude about the organ. It really is true that these instruments brought an end to a community-based musical tradition known as West Gallery music. In fact, it was Thomas Hardy himself who lamented that change in his famous novel Under the Greenwood Tree. This organ was built by the St. Reed Organ Company in the late 1800s, imported all the way from America to this quiet corner of Dorset. Initially, I'm keen to explore its sounds, but my hopes are soon dashed. The problem with this organ is best explained by playing you just one chord. Tuning. It's out of tune. And why is it out of tune? Well, over time the reeds will get worn out and the wood inside the organ expands and contracts with temperature, and that will change the pitch. So the whole thing would have to be retuned, and like so many harmoniums or harmonia, whatever the plural is, they're not in tune. I'm sure all of the stops have somehow been overridden so that when you actually play the organ with no stops drawn, it plays all of the stops. In other words, pulling one of these out doesn't change the sound at all. For every note on a harmonium, you'll have a set of reeds that can be brought into action. And if you don't have any stops drawn, it shouldn't make any sound when you play a note. But this one does. Normally you'd layer different reeds to produce different kinds of sounds, kind of nuanced tones, soft or loud, on a pipe organ or a harmonium, but this one can only be loud. Just playing the start of "The Lord's My Shepherd" shows you what the problem is. I think the most basic question to ask is, what would you do with this organ if you were asked to play for a service here? All the time I've been asked to play
for carol services or funerals in churches a bit like this one, where I'm told that there's a harmonium and I need to find out how to make it sound as good as possible. So usually I'll come out to the church in advance, always before the service. You should never turn up on the day of the service and expect everything to be just fine. It will be complete carnage if you do that, especially when the instrument is like this one. So you'd be told there is a harmonium which works in the building. You'd come and see it, and inevitably you'd find it's a bit like this. You'd sit down to practice a hymn and realise that what's going to come out of this instrument is not going to be very pleasing for people to listen to. These organs are meant to accompany services. They're meant to hold everybody in tune. But if the instrument itself isn't in tune, then what hope do you have? Say, if you were asked to play for a funeral here, one of the most common hymns that you would be asked to play is Abide With Me. Probably the most popular funeral hymn ever here in England, I imagine. But I doubt it will sound much good. Even the first chord doesn't work. Maybe an octave lower. And you can tell instantly we've got a problem, because the board on, which is the lowest sound, which is also jammed out, is always engaged. And if you play two notes down low with the board on, it's just so mushy you can hardly hear the tune. So that rules out playing an octave lower. I normally play an octave lower when an organ is completely out of tune, because you can't hear the tuning problems so much as if you play high. It seems like the higher you get, the more shrill the organ will sound when it's going out of tune, whereas if it's a bit lower, you can usually cover it up.
An honest but a tired rendition from this old harmonium. For an organist like me, it's unfulfilling, but the shortcomings of the instrument are more than made up for by the singing of the birds, nature's very own symphony. And perhaps a building this beautiful needs no music at all.
Winterbourne Thompson, a spectacular church with a not so spectacular organ. You know, the organ in that church is not part of the fabric of the building, is it, really? It's relatively modern, whereas the church is hundreds of years older. So, we need a solution to that problem. But first, let me tell you where I am right now. Normally I film the central part of my videos from a little summer house. But given that it's a summer house, it's far too cold to film there today. So I thought I'd give my musings from the countryside instead. And I've had my hair cut since I filmed, which I'm beginning to regret because my ears are freezing. But anyway, this is part of the Nunton Drove near Salisbury. I've filmed at both Odstock and Nunton churches. You should take a look at them so you can see what the churches look like. But this is a fantastic walk across the Radnor estate near those parishes. And from here, in total solitude, we can talk about the next part of this week's video. 2 more churches to visit, based entirely off of that first trip to Winterbourne Thompson. Now, I showed you an organ which didn't work very well at Winterbourne Thompson, but how could I explain exactly what was wrong with it? Well, how about taking you to a church with a similar organ which does work? And even better, dismantling the organ, the back panel, the top panel, so that you can see the mechanics. You can see what's wrong with those stops at Winterbourne Thompson, and you can see exactly how this musical machine should work. And with that, we went to Long Critchell.
Long Critchell is about 15 miles from Winterbourne Thompson. Both churches are what we sometimes call redundant, but I prefer the term retired, perhaps. Though St Mary's isn't used for regular worship, events and occasional services are held here, and because there's no electricity, a harmonium is the answer.
Welcome back, everybody. I've come back into Long Critchell Church. This will allow me to show you what was wrong with that harmonium at Winterbourne Thompson. And what I've done here is I've taken the back off of the harmonium here, which is in good condition. And also I've taken off the top so that you can see the innards of this organ. I've also used this handy piece of wood to hold up the top cover so that it doesn't fall down. And from that I can show you the inside of the stop mechanism, so you can see exactly how the organ works. I pull out the stop and then these little wooden bars move across to engage a particular set of reeds. The problem at Winterbourne Thompson is it seemed like the whole system was broken because all of the stops were permanently pulled out. I wouldn't ever open up somebody else's organ to have a look inside, so that's why I didn't dismantle the organ at Winterbourne Thompson. But I'm just trying to give you an idea of what the problem could be and how an organ should look inside.
The labelled knobs along the organ keyboard are called stops. Each stop opens a valve, allowing air to vibrate a particular set of reeds to produce the sound. Because all the reeds sound different, the skill of the organist is combining them carefully. We've all heard the expression, pulling out all the stops. But ironically, if you do that, the result is not very pleasing, especially if each of those stops is going slightly out of tune. That, my friends, was the problem at Winterbourne Thompson. Somehow, all of the stops had been engaged permanently, resulting in something of a musical mess. Back here at Long Critchell, all the stops are in order, and there are no holes in the bellows either. That means I can pump with my feet, which feeds air into the wind reservoir, ready to be used in the organ. I carefully select my stops, choose an appropriate Epiphany hymn, and with some wafts of a Parisian restaurant, voila!
We Three Kings performed at St Mary's, Long Critchell. Every time I play a harmonium on this channel, I feel like I should also play a pipe organ to balance things out. And that brings us to the final church of the day. One of my favourites, actually. And that's because of the organ in this church. It records extremely well. Harmoniums don't record particularly well. They're much harder to record. But some pipe organs are just fantastic on YouTube. Which brings us to the William Sweetland organ at St Mary's in Lover.
Lover is a village just inside the boundaries of the New Forest National Park, on the edge of Wiltshire. Historically, it's famous for its romantic association, since in former times, packages and cards for Valentine's Day could be postmarked with the village name. Sadly, the post office closed back in 2008, and part of the village heritage was lost forever. But the church remains, looking as charming as it did back in 1837 when it was built. Inside, we find a beautiful instrument with 2 manuals and a full-size pedal board, designed especially for this building and complemented by the wonderful acoustic. This is a very versatile instrument, but today I have a specific plan in mind.
There was a theme to my choice of music at Lover. And that theme was, of course, the New Year. And what does the New Year bring? Wow, lots of gunshots in the background, it seems. The New Year brings cold weather, winter, but it also brings a sense of the passing of time. The old year has passed and a new year begins. And it's very apt that at St Mary's Church in Lover there is a very loud ticking clock at the back of the church. Just listen to the sound of it. When I was young, my family and I went to an organ recital in Salisbury Cathedral. It was the first time we'd ever been to an organ recital before. And we didn't know what to expect. The first piece that the organist played was Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C major. And we got to the end of this piece and I turned to my dad and I said, "What did you think?" And he said, "It sounds like Hickory Dickory Dock." So I've forever had the association between that piece and Hickory Dickory Dock, the nursery rhyme, in my mind. And I hope you can see the resemblance too. So this is a cheerful beginning to 2025, but with an awareness of the passing of time. This is Bach's Prelude in C major, and it's one stage better. Listen out in the very middle of this piece and you'll hear the St Mary's Church clock striking. That was Bach's Prelude in C major. Sorry, I was just admiring this awesome view. Wow, on a day like today. Bach's Prelude in C major, and I showed you various camera angles of the piece because Bach's music isn't about a tune, it's about lots of tunes. Bach layered melodies over and over again, and he transformed them. He played them at different pitches, he played them in different keys, in completely different incarnations, and that's why the music is so fascinating. So having those camera angles on my feet, my hands, shows you the genius behind Bach's music. And you might like to watch that performance through again, maybe with a score. You can find the score just so you can begin to analyse the wonder of this music. As I've said before, Bach was a genius because his music is so consistently beautiful, it's as if it's a product of nature itself. Making these videos, I am completely independent. It's really important for me to say this. The only person who decides what happens in each Sunday film is me. The effect of that is that, of course, it's me that pays for all of the equipment, and it's me that spends all of the time planning and practicing. If you'd like to help support me and my venture, then you can do that using PayPal, and I would be so grateful because it's really instrumental in me producing these videos. If this means something to you, you're really enjoying it and you look forward to these videos, then perhaps you could make a small donation using my PayPal link underneath this video. If you look underneath, you'll see the link there, which takes you to the Salisbury Organist donations page. And it's from there that you can make a small donation to me and my work if you'd like to. PayPal is the best way of doing it, because wherever you are in the world, the funds are sent directly to me, and they're certainly not siphoned off anywhere else, unlike some other ways of contributing. I would be so grateful. It really helps me continue to make these films, and I would be hugely appreciative. I'd like to end videos, if I can, with some kind of moral, and I was thinking about the last performance of today's video, In the Bleak Midwinter. It was recorded in one take, and I didn't think too hard about how I was going to play it. I just let my hands go onto those keys, choose the stops, and play how I felt I wanted to play. And to me it was a bit of a lesson that you shouldn't overthink things. It's tempting to think too hard about anything in life, which usually results in either not bothering or having a low sense of self-esteem. Whereas if you don't think too hard and you just get going, you can achieve amazing things. So maybe that's a moral for this year. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you next time. Cheerio for now.